So let's dive into what we're talking about today. We started this series last week, Water Walking 101, and we're basing this series on one of my favorite stories in the Gospels, the story where Jesus invites Peter to join him for a walk on the water, and Peter actually walks on the water with Jesus. And if you remember how this story goes, it starts off right after Jesus had fed the 5,000, and he is exhausted, he's wore out, and so he sends the disciples away. He actually tells them to go get on a boat and cross over to the other side of the lake while he dismisses the crowds, goes up on a mountainside to spend some time alone with his heavenly Father. See, Jesus knew that silence and solitude and prayer were essential to his well-being, even though he was the Son of God. So he carves out time to do that. And he'd been praying and being alone with his heavenly Father for a few hours, and it tells us in the story that at 3 o'clock in the morning, when the rest of us should have been asleep, the disciples were out in the boat struggling against the wind and the waves, and Jesus walks to them on the water. When they see Jesus walking on them toward the water, you remember their response. They cried out in fear because they thought they were seeing a ghost. And the reason they thought they were seeing a ghost is because people don't walk on the water, right? But Jesus does. And so Peter, to kind of test the waters a little bit, says, "If it's you, Jesus, tell me to join you for a walk on the water." And how does Jesus respond to that? Come on, jump on in. And so Peter steps out of the boat and walks on the water towards Jesus. But after a few steps on the water, Peter gets distracted by the wind and the waves and takes his eyes off of Jesus, and he starts to sink. And he cries out for Jesus to save him. And Jesus reaches out his hand and rescues Peter and then challenges his faith. He says, "Why did you have so little faith? Why didn't you believe in me? Why did you get distracted?" And then they get back in the boat, and the rest of the disciples and Peter worship Jesus because they say, "Surely this guy is the Son of God." And that's kind of the context for this story. But one of the reasons why I love this story so much is I think it carries within itself this microcosm of what it means to follow Jesus. It's a story that includes faith and risk and failure and fear and waiting and rescue. And I think this story has some very important things to say to us as a church family and you and me individually during the season that we're in. And last week, I kind of left you with this main point, that just as Jesus invited Peter to join him, to step out in faith, to take a risk, to walk on the water with Jesus, so Jesus is extending the same sort of invitation to us every single day. It's this, that Jesus is looking for followers who will step out in faith and trust him enough to do something that they could never do on their own. Jesus is looking for us who call ourselves his followers to take a risk, to be willing to join Jesus in doing something that we can only do with Jesus, that we could never do on our own. But I want you to kind of imagine, just for a minute, being Peter in this story. If you were Peter, think about this question for a minute. If you were Peter, how would you respond to Jesus' invitation to join him for a walk on the water? I mean, if you're Peter and Jesus says, "Come," are you going to be like, "I was just kidding. I'm just kidding, Jesus. It's all good, just come on in here with us." I don't know about that. Or would you be like, "I'm all in. I'm going to join you for the walk on the water"? I think we'd all agree that what Peter was given when Jesus issued this invitation to join him for a walk on the water, he was given the opportunity of a lifetime. I mean, think about it for just a minute. It was the opportunity to do something that no human being had ever done besides Jesus. It was the opportunity to experience the supernatural power of Jesus in a way that no other human being had ever experienced the supernatural power of Jesus. It was an opportunity to make a memory that would last a lifetime. It was the opportunity to do something with Jesus that would change his life and that nobody else got to do with Jesus. So if you were Peter and you were given the same opportunity, this opportunity of a lifetime, how would you respond? How would you respond? Now, I don't think that we're going to get an invitation to join Jesus for a walk on the water, but I think that our lives are filled with opportunities to join Jesus in doing something that we could never do in our own power. And many of those opportunities we just let go by either because we don't recognize them, or we aren't looking for them, or we don't notice them, or we just don't want them, right? But Peter took advantage of this opportunity. And so today I want to talk about this whole idea of these opportunities to step out in faith and trust Jesus enough to do something with him that we could never do on our own. But let me say this first. I'm not saying that every opportunity that you've been given is an opportunity from Jesus. Like if someone calls you up with a great financial opportunity, maybe that's from Jesus, and maybe is a pyramid scheme, right? You know, I'm not saying that every time you have a dream at night that you should do something, that's Jesus speaking to you through that dream. It could be, or it could be bad food that you ate the night before, right? So every opportunity that comes on our way is not necessarily an opportunity from Jesus. That's why we need discernment. We're going to spend all week next week talking about how to discern whether an opportunity or a calling or an invitation is from Jesus or if it's from somebody else or something else. We'll talk about that next week. But today, what I want us to do is maybe start to look at life, look at our life, look at your life, look at my life, look at our world through the expectant lens that there are opportunities out there that we just don't want to miss. That Jesus is inviting us to join him for a walk on a figurative lake, to step out in faith and trust him enough to do something that we could never do on our own. That Jesus is giving us an opportunity of a lifetime. Because here's the deal. If you have an opportunity to walk on water, then you don't want to miss out on that. But I was thinking about opportunities, and really there are two ways that we respond to opportunities. One way is the opportunity is too good to be true, so we pass on it. It's like, it's just, I'm not diving into that. It's too good to be true. I'm going to pass. And the second response is the opportunity is a chance of a lifetime, and we take advantage of it. We have to take advantage of it. The first response is one of reluctance and fear and skepticism, which aren't bad things. It's not bad to be skeptical. It's not bad to be reluctant. But sometimes our reluctance and our fear and our skepticism allow us or force us to let opportunities pass us by. The second one includes the same reluctance and fear and skepticism, but it sees the opportunity for what it is. It is the chance of a lifetime, and it's way too good to let it pass us by. And if I think of the story of Jesus inviting Peter to walk on the water, I would argue that the 11 disciples that stayed on the boat and watched the entire experience, they chose the first path, but Peter chose the second. And my hope that is today, we become a little bit more like Peter. We become a little bit more open to these opportunities and aware of these opportunities, and maybe have the courage to step out and take advantage of some of these opportunities, because I think it would be a tragedy to miss the opportunity of a lifetime that God has for us. Now, just so you know, I didn't come up with this idea on my own. This is a theme that we see all throughout the New Testament. In fact, the Apostle Paul talks about it a couple times. Look at what he says in Ephesians. He says, "Be very careful then how you live, not as unwise, but as wise." That's one of the things we're going to talk about next week. "Making the most of every opportunity, because the days are evil." This is such an important theme for Paul. He uses it in another one of his letters. It says basically the same thing in Colossians. "Be wise in the way you act toward outsiders. Make the most of every opportunity." Now, when I read these things from Paul, I'm like, where did Paul get this idea? Well, I think he got this idea from Jesus. In fact, Jesus tells a story that illustrates and emphasizes how important it is for us to take advantage of the opportunities to join Jesus in doing something that we could never do on our own. In Matthew chapter 25. So if you have your Bibles, you can open up to Matthew 25. It's on the notes section of the event section of the YouVersion Bible app. It's an amazing parable that Jesus tells, and it starts off like this. Verse 14 begins. Again, "It will be like a man going on a journey who called his servants and entrusted his wealth to them. To one he gave 5 bags of gold, to another 2 bags, and to another 1 bag, each according to his ability. Then he went on a journey." So it's a story about a rich man who gives his servants the opportunity of a lifetime. He entrusts to them a certain amount, actually an enormous amount of money, with the expectation that they do something with what has been entrusted to them. Now, maybe in your translation or the translation you grew up in, it doesn't use the phrase bags of gold. Maybe it uses the word talents. That's the literal translation from the Greek, a talent. But I love how this translation uses bag of gold instead of talent, because our word talent doesn't mean the same as their word talent. Because when you think of a talent, you think of being able to play a musical instrument, or being able to play a sport, or being able to eat 100 hot dogs in 3 minutes. I mean, it's an amazing skill and talent that people have. But that's not what the word meant in the first century or in the Greek. See, the word talent was actually a weight measurement that was used to weigh money. One talent was the equivalent of 6,000 denarii. Now, I don't know if you know this or not, but a denarii, or a denarius, was the equivalent of 1 day's work for a day laborer. So, this amount that Jesus is talking about here, 1 talent, was the equivalent of 15 years worth of wages. So just let that sink in for a minute. The rich man gave the first guy 75 years worth of wages. He gave the second guy 30 years worth of wages, and he gave the third guy 15 years worth of wages. Now, you might have been a little upset if you were the third guy and only got 15 years worth of wages and not 75 years worth of wages. But if you went to work tomorrow and your boss said, here's 15 years worth of income, you're pretty happy, right? I'm telling you, they were entrusted with a massive amount of money. And so what's we got to see here is these guys were given the opportunity of a lifetime. But I love what it says. He says that he gave to each one according to their ability. I don't want you to miss that, because this tells us something very, very important about God, that God doesn't give each of us the same opportunities, that he gives us opportunities that are in direct relation or direct proportion to our abilities. See, the opportunities that he gives you are not going to be the same as the opportunities that he gives me. He tailors the opportunities that he gives us to our uniqueness. I think that says something incredible about God, that he doesn't view us all the same, but he says that you have something that you can contribute, and you have something that you can contribute, and I have something that I can contribute, and it's not the same, but we have an amazing thing that we have been entrusted with. But back to the story. So these 3 guys, they were given this enormous amount of money, and the question is, what are they going to do with this opportunity that they've been given? I mean, they've each been entrusted with this massive amount of money. The boss entrusted them with a huge portion of his hard-earned money, and now's their chance. What are they going to do with it? It's the opportunity for them to exercise initiative, to use judgment, to test their skills, to be responsible, to show that they have what it takes to do something with what their boss has entrusted them with. So what are they going to do? The story goes on. Verse 16 says this: the man who received 5 bags of gold went at once and put his money to work and gained 5 bags more. So also the one with 2 bags of gold gained 2 more. But the man who had received 1 bag went off, dug a hole in the ground, and hid his master's money. Think about the first and second guys for a minute. They went at once and put their money to work and doubled it. I love how it actually uses that phrase, at once. Like this first servant immediately jumped at this opportunity that he had been given. It reminds me of Peter, who, when Jesus invited him to join him for a walk on the water, didn't say, let me think about it. No, he immediately gets out of the boat and starts walking towards Jesus. See, this servant realized that he had been given, actually the first and second servant realized that they had been given the opportunity of a lifetime. And so they respond at once and do something with it. I think they're thinking to themselves, I might never ever get an opportunity like this again. So they don't allow anything to delay them or distract them from making the most of this opportunity. I think these first 2 guys set a huge example for you and for me for how we are to respond when Jesus invites us to step out in faith and trust him enough to do something with him that we could never do on our own. See, the truth is Jesus has invitations like this for us and opportunities like this for us all the time. And I think the best way for us to think about it is he has entrusted you and me with a life. I used to have a shirt that I got at a conference that I went to a long time ago that said, you have one life, do something. You have one life. God has entrusted you with one life. And in your life, you have things that make you you. You have unique gifts and talents and skills and abilities and resources. You have a body and a mind, and some of your minds better than others of your minds, But the truth is, you have been given something. You have been entrusted something by God. And he expects you to do something with that because he doesn't want you to miss out on joining him and doing something with him that you could never do on your own. But the third servant, man, he's an example of what we're not to do. He takes the greatest opportunity that he's ever been given and he buries it in a field. Makes me wonder how many of us have things, gifts, talents, skills, resources, abilities that we're burying. That we kind of are like, I don't really feel like using that, or I don't want to use that, or I want to pretend that's not there. I have other things that I need to do. And the opportunity of a lifetime that we've been given by God, we're like, I'm just going to bury it. I think too often, at least in some parts of our lives, we're a lot like this third guy, which is why we should pay a careful attention to the rest of the parable, because the rest of the parable both serves as motivation to make the most of the opportunities that God sends us, and a very harsh warning against wasting those opportunities. Look at what it says. After a long time, the master of those servants returned and settled accounts with them. The man who had received 5 bags of gold brought in the other 5. Master, he said, you entrusted me with 5 bags of gold. See, I have gained 5 more. He goes on. His master replied, well done, good and faithful servant. You have been faithful with a few things. I will put you in charge of many things. Come and share in your master's happiness. Goes on. The man with 2 bags of gold also came. Master, he said, you entrusted me with 2 bags of gold. See, I have gained 2 more. And then his master replied, well done, good and faithful servant. You have been faithful with a few things. I will put you in charge of many things. Come and share in your master's happiness. These 2 servants, the ones who took advantage of the opportunity that had been given to them, were rewarded with both words of affirmation from their master and greater responsibility from their master. It reminds me of a very important principle. You know this, right? Faithfulness in the small things leads to the opportunity to exercise greater responsibility in some bigger things. That's exactly what was going on here. Come and share in your master's happiness. I think most of us in here, we hear that phrase, well done, good and faithful servant. We would love for God to look us in the eye and say that one day, right? He says that only because they took advantage of what they had been entrusted with. But the story is not over, because we read this in verse 24. Then the man who had received 1 bag of gold came. Master, he said, I knew that you are a hard man, harvesting where you have not sown and gathering where you have not scattered seed. So I was afraid, and I went out and hid your gold in the ground. See, here's what belongs to you. His master replied, you wicked, lazy servant. So you knew that I harvest where I have not sown and gather where I have not scattered seed. Well, then you should have put my money on deposit with the bankers so that when I returned, I would have received it back with interest. So take the bag of gold from him and give it to the one who has 10 bags. For whoever has will be given more, and they will have an abundance. Whoever does not have, even what they have will be taken from them. And throw that worthless servant outside into the darkness, where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. So here you've got this third guy, and let's just say, this isn't who you want to be. Like, this is not the guy that you want to be like. The master calls him wicked and lazy. He takes the money from him that he had entrusted to him and gives it to the first guy, and then he kicks him out of his house, basically fires him from his job. But I want you to notice something about this third servant. I think there's a detail in the story that says something powerful to us that we might read over at times, that maybe is our rationale for burying our gifts because it was his rationale for burying his gift. Look back at verse 24. It says, then the man who had received the 1 bag of gold came and said, Master, he said, I knew that you're a hard man, harvesting where you had not sown and gathering where you have not scattered seed. So I was afraid and went out and hid your gold in the ground. See, here is what belongs to you. Do you realize that he was motivated by fear? You know this, but fear makes us do dumb things. Fear keeps us from making decisions that we know we should make. Fear keeps us from having conversations that we know we should have. Fear actually makes us bury the treasure that God has entrusted to us. Fear keeps us, or can cause us to be disobedient to Jesus. Fear, it keeps us from taking advantage of the opportunities that have been given to us. That is exactly what was the problem with this servant, and I think that's our problem a lot of times. But I want you to notice what his fear was based on. I would argue that his fear was based on the wrong perception of his master. Remember, he said, I knew that you were harsh, and I was just, basically I was afraid of who you are. He had forgotten that just a little while earlier, this master had entrusted him, had believed in him so much that he entrusted him with a significant portion of his hard-earned money. I don't think the master would have said, look, I'm going to give it to him because I know he's going to blow it. No, he thought that this guy had what it took to do something with this money. And I think that says something about God. We'll come back to that in just a minute. But I just love John Ortberg's commentary on this because I think it has a lot to say to us. The servant is not judged for doing something bad. He's judged for doing nothing. I don't want us to be guilty of doing nothing with what God has entrusted to us. But the truth is, I know that many of us, when Jesus invites us for that proverbial walk on the water, we immediately experience fear. We're afraid of taking a risk and stepping out in faith and obeying God. Maybe we think he's not going to take care of us, or maybe we think that he's just telling us to step out in faith so that we can fall flat on our faces and he can laugh at us. But think about that. That fear is rooted in a misunderstanding of who God is. I hope you know this, but if you don't, let this sink in for just a minute. God loves you. He loves you so much and believes in you so much that he has entrusted to you your life with your gifts and your abilities and your skills and your financial resources and your relational abilities and everything that makes you you. He has given that to you. He has entrusted you with that. He has given you the opportunity of a lifetime. Why? Because he expects you to do something with it. He believes in you. He loves you enough to entrust you with this. And what Jesus makes clear here is that fear, it's not an adequate excuse for missing out on what God is calling us to do. And when we see God for who he is, it's like Tozer says, the most important thing about us is what we think about when we think about God. It shapes everything about us. Right? And when we view God as one who is loving and compassionate and kind and slow to anger and abounding in love and faithfulness and forgiving of all of our wickedness, rebellion, and sin, when we see God like that, man, our fear should just go out the door because he believes in us and he has entrusted us with a life and he wants us to do something with that. The truth is, I don't want any of us to be like this third guy in the story. But here's what I don't want you to miss. I think a lot of times this is one of those parables that we have a tendency to misread. And sometimes we misread it because we think of the word talent and we think of our talents. And you know what? This isn't a story about talents, but it does include the use of your talents. Sometimes we misread this parable because we think it's about money. The truth is, this parable does include money, but it is not all about money. It applies to our money, but it is not just about money. So this parable isn't even a parable about our spiritual gifts, even though I think it applies to our spiritual gifts. This is a parable about the life that we've been given by God. It's that he has given us as his followers an opportunity to use our talents, our skills, our gifts, our resources, our abilities, everything about us, our bodies, our minds, our wills, for his glory. Why? Because he loves us. He has entrusted to us this amazing opportunity, and he expects us to do something with what he has given to us, which leaves us with an important question that I want to leave you with this morning, and that is this. What will you do? I think we have it. Do we not have that one? No one? Oh, okay, well, I'll just read it to you then. What will you do with what God has given you? What will you do with what God has given you? What will you do with the opportunities that God has given you? What will you do with the financial resources that God has given you? What will you do with the unique skills that God has given you? What will you do with the time that God's given you? What will you do with the mind that God's given you? What will you do with the life that God has given you? See, I think this parable is a stark warning against wasting the opportunities that God has given to us. So the question is, what will you do with what God has given you? How will you make the most of every opportunity? I was thinking about that. I think it starts with positioning ourselves with some openness. See, a lot of times we position ourselves with reluctance, or maybe we're just closed, or we're just not as open. We say we're open to God, but we're only open just a little bit to God. And I think if we're going to do something with what God has given us, we need to position ourselves to being a little bit more open, which reminds me of Peter. Do you remember what Peter asked Jesus before he got out of the boat? If it's you, Jesus, tell me to join you for a walk on the water. See, Peter asked Jesus for an opportunity to do what Jesus was doing. And maybe that's what we should do as well. In fact, I've broken it down into 3 different prayers. Do we have these? So 3 different prayers. One is just to pray for opportunities. The second is to pray for clarity to see opportunities. The first is just an openness. God, I just want to pray for opportunities. But sometimes we're so distracted we can't see those. So that leads to the second one. We got to pray for clarity to see those opportunities. And then the third one is really what all of us need, the courage to take advantage of the opportunities that come our way. And I just thought of a few opportunities we might could pray for. Pray for the opportunity to share your faith. You guys know, one of the things I pray for you all the time is that God would give you an opportunity to share your faith, to talk about Jesus. Maybe pray for an opportunity to be more generous, or pray for opportunities to use your gifts or your skills or your talents. Maybe pray for an opportunity to be salt and light at work or in your neighborhood or where there's a lot of darkness. Pray for an opportunity to show love. What if we all started just praying for opportunities? God, I just want to pray for opportunities. And I want to pray for the clarity to see those when they come my way from you. And then I want to pray for the courage to take advantage of those, because I don't want to be like this third guy. But I think the greatest opportunity we've been given, and most of us already know this, is the opportunity to know Jesus personally. The opportunity to have a relationship with Jesus. And everything we've talked about so far is pointless if you don't start there. Because the opportunity that Jesus gives us, that's the greatest opportunity we've ever been given, is the opportunity to know him, to have our sins forgiven, and to be in a restored relationship with our Heavenly Father. And if you're here this morning and you've never taken advantage of that opportunity, let me tell you something. If Jesus were here and he were looking at you in the face, he would say, I've got an opportunity of a lifetime for you. Follow me. And then you'd have a choice. Too good to be true, I'm going to pass. It's an opportunity of a lifetime. I am all in. So why don't you close your eyes? I want to give you an opportunity to start praying this right now. And first, I just want you to maybe voice a prayer for openness. God, give me opportunities. And maybe you can list out a few opportunities to maybe share your faith or be more generous or use your gifts and skills, talents, opportunity to show love. Pray for opportunities. And then Why don't you pray for some clarity? Say, God, help me to see these. I don't want to miss them. And then ask him for the courage to take advantage of the opportunities that he sends your way. Lord Jesus, I thank you for this parable that reminds us that we have been entrusted with an amazing life that's filled with gifts and talents and skills and abilities, and that you entrust us with something valuable. And my prayer is that we would make the most of every opportunity that you've given us, that we would be like the first and second servants in this story, so that one day we can hear you say, well done, good and faithful servants. May we be faithful. And in being faithful, God, we just pray for opportunities. I pray that for this church family, that you would give us opportunities to be salt and light, even today. Give us opportunities to love people. Give us opportunities to forgive. Give us opportunities to share our faith, to talk about you. Give us opportunities to be more generous. Give us opportunities to use our skills and talents and abilities so that you can be glorified. Give us opportunities to walk on the water with you, Jesus. But we also need you to give us some clarity so that we can see those. There's a lot going on in our lives, and we are easily distracted, kind of like Peter. Would you give us a focus so that we can't miss, so we don't miss those opportunities that come our way from you? And then, Lord, would you give us the courage to take advantage of the opportunities that you give us? I thank you for loving us enough, God, that you entrust us with some pretty incredible opportunities and responsibilities. Help us to make the most of them. I pray this in Jesus' name. Amen.